Clean it again and do it right this time. The coffee hit the marble floor at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning. Marcus Sterling was on his knees before the liquid stopped spreading his worn work shirt, pulling tight across his broad shoulders as he reached for the industrial mop. Above him, Victoria Blackwood adjusted her designer blazer without slowing her stride, her heels clicking away like gunshots against the pristine floors of Blackwood Industries headquarters. Marcus wrung out the mop and his work shirt stretched taut across his chest, revealing the shadow of something dark beneath the thin fabric. Wings. Large, spanning from shoulder to shoulder. Victoria's assistant stopped walking. "Ma'am," she whispered urgently, grabbing Victoria's elbow. "Did you see his chest?" Victoria turned, her steel-grey eyes narrowing as she stared at the man still kneeling on the floor. That looked like... The assistant's voice trailed off. "Who the hell is he?" Victoria's question hung in the air like smoke. "Before we dive into Marcus's hidden past, tell us where in the world you are watching from." We love seeing how far our stories travel, because what you are about to discover will show you that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places. Marcus woke at 5:45 every morning without an alarm. His body had been trained by years of necessity, by the weight of responsibility that never let him rest. He moved through the small apartment in darkness muscle memory, guiding him past the worn furniture and peeling paint. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Rent was $950 a month, which ate up most of his income from 2 jobs. The scent of instant coffee mixed with the lingering smell of antiseptic that seemed permanently embedded in his skin. Strange how some things never leave you, even when you have left them behind. By 6:15, Tyler's breakfast sat waiting on the small table by the window. Scrambled eggs slightly burnt around the edges because Marcus still struggled with the timing, and toast cut into triangles the way his 7-year-old son preferred. Marcus pushed open the door to the second bedroom. Tyler lay curled beneath a blanket covered in cartoon rockets, his dark hair tousled against the pillow. At 7 years old, he was small for his age, with serious brown eyes that seemed to see everything. "Hey, buddy, time to get up," Marcus said softly, his voice still rough with sleep. Tyler rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly. "Dad, why do you smell like the doctor's office when you don't work there anymore?" Marcus's hand stilled on the school uniform he was laying out. Navy polo, khaki pants, white socks. The same question Tyler had been asking in different ways for months. Sometimes the past follows us around, buddy. Like a ghost. Something like that. Marcus helped Tyler dress his fingers, working the buttons that never seemed to line up right on the first try. These moments were precious to him. These quiet minutes before the world demanded its due. They ate together at the small table by the window, the morning light casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Tyler talked about a spelling test on Friday, about a kid named Jimmy who could do a backflip on the playground, about an art project starting next week where they had to draw their family. Marcus listened to every word, filing away each detail like treasure. These conversations were the fuel that kept him going through 18-hour days. Dad Tyler's voice was small, uncertain. "Yeah, buddy. How come other kids' dads wear ties and you wear uniforms?" Marcus's hand stilled on his coffee cup, the ceramic warm against his palm. The question hit deeper than Tyler could know. Different dads have different jobs. That doesn't make any job better or worse. Tommy's dad is a doctor. He says doctors make lots of money and help people. They wear white coats and have important jobs. The irony was a knife twisting in Marcus's chest. "Money isn't everything, Tyler." The boy frowned, his small face serious. Then what is Marcus looked at his son's face, open and curious and innocent of the way the world could break a person down and rebuild them into something unrecognizable. Being here with you, making sure you know you are loved. That's everything. Tyler nodded slowly like he understood. but didn't the way children do when adults give them answers that are true, but incomplete. At 7:30, they walked 6 blocks to Riverside Elementary. Tyler's backpack was too big for his shoulders, but he carried it himself, his small chin set with determination. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of coffee from the shops they passed, and the exhaust from cars full of parents rushing to drop off their own children. At the school gate, Tyler turned around, his face bright with the boundless energy that made Marcus's heart ache with love and protectiveness. "See you later, Dad." "See you later, buddy." Tyler disappeared through the doors with the other children, his rocket backpack bobbing in the crowd. Marcus stood there longer than necessary, watching, until his son was completely out of sight. Other parents hurried past him, mothers in business suits checking their phones, fathers adjusting ties and discussing conference calls. None of them looked at the man in the janitor's uniform. He might as well have been invisible. Marcus walked back alone, the empty streets echoing with his footsteps. The apartment felt different in the daylight, smaller somehow, the shadows revealing every crack and worn spot he tried to ignore at night. He showered quickly, changed into his work clothes, and checked that the door was locked twice. On his way out, he stopped at the small table in the hallway. A framed photograph sat there, facing the wall, gathering dust. He didn't turn it around. He never did. Some wounds were too fresh, even after years. Inside his wallet, tucked behind a $5 bill, was another photograph. Faded, creased down the middle from being folded and unfolded too many times. A woman in a white hospital coat stood beside a younger version of himself, both of them smiling at the camera. Behind them, blurred but still readable, the sign read, "St. Augustine Children's Hospital." He didn't take the photo out. He never did. But he knew it was there, a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he had once been. The reassignment came on a Wednesday. Marcus's supervisor handed him a new badge and a different set of keys, explaining in clipped professional tones that he was being moved to the executive floors. Higher pay, 50 cents more per hour. Marcus took the assignment without comment, without questions, because that's what you did when you needed every dollar you could scrape together. The 14th floor smelled different from the lower levels. Leather and expensive coffee and air freshener that probably cost more than Marcus's weekly groceries. The scent hit him as soon as the elevator doors opened, a reminder that he was entering a different world, one where he would always be an outsider. He arrived at 600 in the morning before most of the staff, and worked through his routine with methodical precision. Empty trash cans, vacuum carpets, wipe down conference tables, restock supplies. The work was the same, but the environment was intimidating, in a way that made Marcus hyper-aware of every sound he made, every surface he touched. Victoria Blackwood's office sat at the end of the hall like a fortress. For the first 2 weeks, he never saw her. She arrived after he finished his morning shift, left after he had gone home to pick up Tyler. He knew her schedule from the calendar on her desk that he dusted each morning. Meetings in New York, conference calls with Tokyo investor dinners that ran past midnight. Her life was a whirlwind of power and responsibility that never seemed to slow down. Marcus moved through the corporate world like a ghost haunting his former life, invisible to the executives who hurried past him in their expensive suits. They looked through him as if he were part of the building itself, as functional and forgettable as the cleaning equipment he pushed from room to room. But Tyler saw him differently. Every afternoon when Marcus picked him up from school, the boy's face would light up with pure joy, as if his father were the most important person in the world. "Dad, guess what happened in art class today?" Tyler would chatter as they walked home, his small hand warm in Marcus's larger one. "Mrs. Peterson said my drawing of our family was really good. I drew you in your work uniform because I think you look strong in it." These moments were Marcus's salvation, the reminder that worth wasn't measured by the size of your office or the cost of your clothes. Tyler's love was unconditional, unmarked by the judgments and hierarchies that ruled the adult world. Tommy's dad drives a shiny car, Tyler observed one afternoon as they waited at a crosswalk. Why is ours so bumpy? Marcus looked down at his son, seeing the innocence in his eyes, the genuine curiosity without any hint of complaint. Our car gets us where we need to go, buddy. Sometimes that's all that matters. But wouldn't it be nice to have a shiny one? Maybe, Marcus said carefully, but then we might not appreciate the things we do have. Tyler considered this seriously, the way he approached all of life's mysteries. Like what? Like each other, like the fact that I get to walk you to school every morning and hear about your day every afternoon. Some dads don't get that. Tyler squeezed his father's hand. I'm glad you are my dad, even if our car is bumpy. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they reminded him of everything that mattered, everything he was fighting to protect and provide for. At home, Marcus would help Tyler with homework at the small kitchen table, their heads bent together over math worksheets and spelling lists. Tyler was bright, curious, always asking questions that made Marcus think carefully about his answers. Dad, how come you know so much about science? Tyler asked one evening as Marcus helped him understand how the heart worked for a health assignment. Marcus's hand stilled on the textbook, his chest tight with memories of medical school, of residency, of the years when such knowledge had been his profession rather than his past. I read a lot when I was younger. Like a really lot. Yeah, buddy, a really lot. Tyler accepted this explanation the way children do, without pressing for details that might be painful. But Marcus could see the wheels turning in his son's mind, filing away another piece of the puzzle that was his father's mysterious past. Later, after Tyler was asleep, Marcus would sit in the living room of their small apartment and feel the weight of his choices. He had traded a corner office for a janitor's closet, traded respect for invisibility, traded his identity for his son's security. Some nights, the trade felt worth it. Other nights, it felt like dying slowly. But Tyler's laughter from the next room, the sound of his son talking in his sleep about rocket ships and playground adventures, reminded Marcus that some sacrifices were sacred. He had lost everything that defined him professionally, but he had kept the only thing that defined him personally. He was Tyler's father, and that was enough. It had to be enough. Then one morning, Victoria came in early. Marcus was cleaning the hallway outside her office when the elevator doors opened at 6:30 am. Victoria stepped out, phone pressed to her ear, her heels sharp against the tile, like the staccato beat of a war drum. I don't care what the lawyers say, she was saying into the phone, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her words treated as commands. Settle it. I want this done by Friday. She walked past Marcus without looking, her designer suit impeccable, despite the early hour, her dark hair pulled back in a style that spoke of efficiency over beauty. He moved his cart aside to let her through, noting the way she carried herself, like armor, every line of her body, speaking of walls built high and reinforced often. 5 minutes later, he heard something fall inside her office. Marcus knocked twice on the doorframe, his knuckles gentle against the expensive wood. Ma'am, do you need... Come in. He pushed the door open and found papers scattered across the carpet like fallen snow. A manila folder lay open, its contents spread in an arc around Victoria's desk chair. Medical documents, lab results, forms with letterhead he recognized but tried not to read. Marcus bent down and gathered the pages without looking at them, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He stacked them carefully, edges aligned perfectly, and set them on her desk in a neat pile. Victoria watched him from behind her computer screen, her grey eyes studying his face with an intensity that made the air in the room feel charged. You didn't look at them? No, ma'am. Most people would have. Marcus straightened, meeting her gaze directly. I'm not most people. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. In this world of corporate sharks and social climbers, Marcus's integrity was apparently so unexpected, it was noteworthy. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus Sterling, ma'am." "How long have you worked here, Marcus?" 3 weeks on this floor. 6 months total." Victoria nodded slowly, filing the information away. Marcus picked up his cart and turned to leave, eager to escape the weight of her attention. "Wait." He stopped his hand on the doorframe. Victoria stood and walked around her desk, stopping 3 feet away with her arms crossed. She was tall for a woman, nearly matching his height, and she used every inch of it to project authority. "You were here last Tuesday morning." "In the lobby." "Yes, ma'am. Your shirt was wet from the coffee incident." Marcus said nothing, unsure where this was leading, but certain it wasn't anywhere good. "I saw something under the fabric when you bent down." Her voice was controlled, professional, but there was something underneath it, a curiosity that felt personal rather than corporate. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's personal. I'm asking, and I'm not answering." The words hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Victoria's eyes narrowed. No one spoke to her like that. Not employees, not partners, not board members. Her position demanded deference, and she was accustomed to receiving it without question. "I could have you reassigned," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze water. "Then do it." They stared at each other across the expensive carpet, the air between them crackling with tension. Victoria was used to winning these stare-downs, used to people backing down when faced with her authority. But Marcus didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't give an inch. Finally, Victoria stepped back, though, whether in retreat or simply to reassess. Marcus couldn't tell. "Get back to work," she said. Marcus left without another word, but he could feel her eyes on him as he walked away. He had drawn her attention now, and in his experience that was never a good thing. But what Marcus didn't know was that his new assignment would unravel secrets that had been buried for 16 years. "Don't go anywhere." That afternoon, Victoria's assistant appeared at Marcus's supply closet with a clipboard and an expression of bureaucratic efficiency. "Miss Blackwood has requested a background check on all new personnel assigned to the executive floors," she said, not looking up from her forms. "Standard procedure. I'll need your employment history references, previous addresses, everything before 2018. Marcus kept his face carefully neutral, though his heart rate spiked. "There's nothing before 2018. The assistant frowned, finally looking up from her clipboard. "Everyone has something, Mr. Sterling. Previous employment tax records. Professional licenses. The computer systems show gaps. Not me." She scribbled something on her form, her pen scratching against the paper like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I'll need you to fill out these additional forms anyway. Company policy." After she left, Marcus stared at the blank forms for a long time. Each question was a landmine, each empty space a reminder of everything he had lost. Previous employment: pediatric surgeon, St. Augustine Children's Hospital. Reason for leaving, career destroyed by lawsuit. Personal references. All the colleagues who had turned their backs when the accusations flew. He left every space blank and returned the forms unsigned. That night, Victoria sat alone in her office, long after the building had emptied, a file spread open in front of her like accusations waiting to be made. Marcus Sterling's employment records were pitifully thin. 2 pages, most of them blank. It was as if the man had materialized from nowhere in 2018, fully formed and completely anonymous. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had hoped never to use again. "Hartwell Investigations." "Mr. Hartwell, this is Victoria Blackwood. I need you to find someone for me." "Of course, Miss Blackwood. What can you tell me about the subject?" Victoria looked at Marcus's employee photo clipped to the front of the file. A serious face, kind eyes, the expression of a man who had learned to keep his thoughts hidden. "His name is Marcus Sterling. Mid-30s, works as a custodian. And Mr. Hartwell. I need to know everything. Everything. Where he came from, what he did before 2018, why he's working as a janitor when something about him suggests he's capable of much more. She paused, remembering the way he had handled her medical documents, the reverence in his touch. And I want to know about the tattoo on his chest. Unusual request, unusual circumstances. How quickly can you work? Give me a week. You have 3 days. Victoria hung up and stared out her office window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Marcus Sterling was tucking his son into bed, reading bedtime stories, being a father. But who had he been before? And why did she care so much about finding out? She touched her throat absently, her fingers tracing the thin line hidden beneath her collar, and wondered why Marcus Sterling felt like a ghost from a past she couldn't quite remember. 3 days later, the investigator's report arrived in a manila envelope marked confidential. Victoria opened it in her office after everyone had gone home, the building silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of traffic far below. Inside were 3 pages and 2 photographs that would change everything. She read slowly, her coffee growing cold, as the pieces of Marcus Sterling's puzzle began forming a picture she wasn't prepared to see. Marcus Sterling, age 38. Current employment, custodial staff. Blackwood Industries. Previous employment unknown. No tax records before 2018. No professional licenses on file. No criminal record. Subject appears to have no documented existence prior to 6 years ago. Victoria flipped to the photographs. The first showed Marcus outside Riverside Elementary, his hand holding that of a small, dark-haired boy. Father and son, the investigator had noted. The child's name was Tyler Sterling, age 7, enrolled in 1st grade. The second photograph caught Marcus at work, reaching up to change a light bulb in the conference room. His uniform shirt had pulled tight across his chest, revealing the unmistakable outline of wings tattooed across his entire torso. Large wings, detailed and elaborate, the kind of artwork that took months to complete and cost thousands of dollars. Victoria stared at the image, her pulse quickening. She had seen markings like that before, in a different life, a different world. Medical professionals sometimes got them symbols of their oath, reminders of their calling. The caduceus, the rod of Asclepius, angel wings with Latin phrases inscribed beneath. She opened her laptop and searched large wing tattoo medical meaning. The results came back immediately. Pages of forum discussions and medical websites explaining the symbolism. One forum post made her stop breathing. I got mine after my license was revoked. The wings remind me who I used to be before everything fell apart. Victoria's hands trembled as she typed St. Augustine Medical Malpractice 2018 into the search bar. The results loaded slowly, each link a potential revelation. Dozens of articles, lawsuit filings, hospital policy changes. She scrolled through them with growing dread, looking for something that would connect Marcus Sterling to her past. Then she found it. Surgeon accused of negligence in child surgery. Family files. Lawsuit. The article was brief, written in the dry language of legal journalism. A doctor at St. Augustine Children's Hospital had performed emergency surgery on an 8-year-old girl. There had been complications, the family claimed, permanent scarring. The hospital had settled quietly to avoid publicity. The surgeon's name was redacted in the public filing, but the article mentioned the case number. Victoria's blood turned to ice. She knew that case number. She had seen it on legal documents, heard it discussed in her father's study, lived with its consequences for 16 years. With hands that shook like leaves in a storm, she accessed the hospital's archived records. Her father had been on the board of directors there for 20 years before he died. She still had access to certain databases privileges that came with the Blackwood name and the donations her family had made over the decades. She entered the case number and waited. The file opened like a door to a past she had tried desperately to forget. Plaintiff Blackwood family. Patient Victoria Blackwood, age 8. Surgeon Dr. Marcus Sterling. Victoria shot to her feet, her chair crashing backward against the window. She pressed her hands against the desk, trying to steady herself, as the room spun around her like a carnival ride gone wrong. Marcus Sterling had saved her life. She scrolled down through the medical records, reading details that brought back flashes of memory. The emergency surgery, the skilled hands that had stopped her heart from failing, the perfect procedure that had given her a future. The scarring her father had called disfigurement, the lawsuit he had filed, claiming negligence, the media campaign he had waged to destroy the reputation of the man who had saved his daughter's life. The hospital had sided with her father. Marcus had lost his license, his career, his reputation. The system had protected the wealthy Blackwood family and sacrificed the doctor who had done his job perfectly. Victoria grabbed her coat and keys and walked out of the building, her heels echoing through the empty lobby like gunshots. 20 minutes later, she sat in her car outside a modest apartment building on the east side of town, staring up at a third-floor window where warm light spilled through thin curtains. Through the glass, she could see Marcus reading to Tyler, father and son, on a worn couch, the boy's head resting trustingly on his father's shoulder. The scene was so peaceful, so full of love, that it made Victoria's chest ache with something she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting moved to 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. Need you there early. Victoria didn't respond. She sat in the dark, watching the man her family had destroyed tuck his son into bed, and wondered how she could ever face him again. The weight of 16 years of ignorance pressed down on her like a stone. Marcus appeared at the window, briefly adjusting the curtains, and for a moment Victoria thought he might see her car. But he was looking at his son, not out at the street, his face soft with the kind of love that money couldn't buy and power couldn't touch. She drove home in silence, the investigator's report on the passenger seat beside her like evidence of a crime she had committed without knowing it. That night, she didn't sleep. She stood at her penthouse window looking out at the city lights and thinking about second chances, about the wings tattooed on Marcus Sterling's chest, and about the girl he had saved who had grown up to become the woman who employed him to clean floors. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know how yet. Victoria's obsession began at 3:00 a.m. with coffee that tasted like regret, and medical files spread across her dining room table like tarot cards predicting a future she wasn't ready to face. She had printed everything: Marcus's employment record, the investigator's photos, archived hospital reports, court documents that had been sealed for privacy, but were accessible to someone with her father's old connections. Each page was another layer of the truth she had been living above for 16 years, unknowing and complicit. The wing tattoo photograph lay at the center of it all. She had enlarged it, enhanced it, studied every line and shadow until she could trace the design from memory. They weren't just wings, they were phoenix wings, she realized now. The mythical bird that rises from its own ashes, reborn from destruction. The irony cut deep. Her hands trembled as she dialed her investigator again. "Hartwell here. I need more," Victoria said without preamble. Everything about Marcus Sterling's life before 2018, his medical practice, his family, why he disappeared. "Miss Blackwood, it's 3 a.m. I don't care what time it is. I need to know about his wife." A pause. His wife. The employment records list him as widowed. Find out who she was when she died, how she died. Find out if they had other children. Find out what happened to make a successful surgeon vanish from the medical world completely. This is going to require deeper digging, Miss Blackwood. Hospital records, insurance files, death certificates. It's not going to be cheap. I don't care what it costs. She hung up and stared at the city lights beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably lying awake too, thinking about his son, his lost career, the future he was trying to build from the wreckage of his past. Did he ever think about the 8-year-old girl whose heart he had repaired? Did he remember her name, her face, the way she had looked up at him with complete trust? Before the anesthesia took her under, Victoria touched her throat where the scar lay hidden beneath silk and concealer, a thin line that ran from her collarbone to just below her chin. She had had it covered by the best plastic surgeons money could buy, but she could still feel it, still trace its path with her fingertips in the dark moments between sleep and waking. Her father had called it disfigurement. My daughter, he had raged to anyone who would listen, scarred for life by a surgeon's incompetence. He had made it about beauty, about perfection, about the way the scar might affect her marriage prospects or business credibility. He had never once mentioned that Marcus Sterling had saved her life. Victoria walked to her bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. In the harsh fluorescent light, she could see the scar, clearly a thin white line that spoke of trauma and healing of death narrowly avoided. She had spent her adult life hiding it, wearing high collars and strategic jewelry, applying concealer with the precision of a surgeon herself. But tonight, she saw it differently. Tonight it looked like a signature, like proof of a miracle performed by hands that now emptied her trash cans and mopped her floors. Her phone rang at 6:00 a.m., Hartwell with preliminary findings. "I found her," he said. "Sarah Sterling, Marcus's wife. Married 12 years, died 4 years ago. Cancer." Victoria's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Cancer pancreatic. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. The medical bills were extensive. I found bankruptcy filings, property sales, liquidated assets. Marcus Sterling sold everything they owned to pay for treatments. While the lawsuit was ongoing, the timeline overlaps. Your father's legal action began in late 2017. Sarah Sterling was diagnosed 6 months later. The lawsuit destroyed Marcus's career right when he needed income most for his wife's care. Victoria closed her eyes, seeing the pieces fall into place like dominoes toppling in slow motion. While her father was destroying Marcus's reputation and career, Marcus was watching his wife die, selling their home to pay for chemotherapy, fighting a legal battle with one hand and holding his dying wife's hand with the other. "There's more," Hartwell continued. "I found colleagues willing to talk off the record. Marcus was considered one of the best pediatric surgeons on the East Coast. Perfect record, innovative techniques beloved by patients and staff. The lawsuit was the first complaint ever filed against him. What about the child Tyler born 3 years before his mother died? Marcus took early retirement from the hospital to care for Sarah full-time during her illness. After she died, he disappeared from the medical community entirely. No forwarding address, no new practice, no insurance claims. He became invisible." Victoria hung up and stared at her reflection in the black window, seeing not a powerful CEO, but a woman who had built her life on a foundation of lies. Every success she had achieved, every company she had acquired, every board position she had earned, all of it rested on the injustice her family had perpetrated against the man who had saved her life. But the worst part wasn't the guilt. The worst part was that she had participated willingly. At 18, legally an adult, she had signed the lawsuit renewal papers without reading them. She had trusted her father's version of events, accepted his narrative, that Marcus Sterling was incompetent, dangerous, someone who had harmed her rather than healed her. She had been old enough to ask questions, old enough to demand answers, old enough to seek the truth. Instead, she had chosen ignorance because it was easier, because it allowed her father to handle everything while she focused on college and internships and building the career that would eventually make her a billionaire. Meanwhile, Tyler was learning to live without his mother, and Marcus was learning to be both father and caregiver while grieving his wife and fighting accusations that threatened to destroy what little he had left. Victoria showered, dressed, and drove to the office with a sick feeling in her stomach. Today she would see Marcus Sterling again, would watch him clean her building with hands that had once performed miracle surgeries. She would have to look into the eyes of the man her family had destroyed and pretend she didn't know who he really was. But secrets Victoria was learning have a way of demanding to be told. The truth was a living thing, growing stronger every day, pressing against the walls of silence that had contained it for 16 years. And today those walls were beginning to crack. The all-staff meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. in the main atrium. Marcus arrived early to set up chairs, counting under his breath, to keep the rows straight and even. 200 employees would fill this space, executives and managers and administrative staff, all of them occupying a world he had once belonged to, but could never enter again. The atrium was Blackwood Industries' crown jewel, a soaring space of glass and steel that spoke of success and ambition. Marcus arranged the chairs with methodical precision, his movements economical and practiced. He had learned to find dignity in this work, to take pride in doing it well, even when it felt like wearing someone else's clothes. The space filled quickly as the hour approached. Executives in tailored suits clustered near the front, their conversations peppered with terms like quarterly projections and market penetration. Managers with tablets and smartphones occupied the middle sections, scrolling through emails even as they waited for the meeting to begin. Administrative staff gathered near the coffee station, their voices lower, their positions less secure. Marcus stayed against the wall, invisible in his uniform. He had learned to occupy space without claiming it to be present, without being seen. It was a skill born of necessity, refined through years of moving through a world that had decided he no longer belonged in it. Victoria entered last, her heels clicking against the marble floor like the countdown to an execution. She walked to the front of the room without looking at anyone, her face pale and composed. She hadn't slept, Marcus noticed. There were shadows under her eyes that even expensive concealer couldn't hide. She knows, he realized with a jolt of recognition. Somehow she had figured out who he was. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his hands shake around the mop handle he gripped like an anchor. Gordon Hayes, the VP of Operations, took the microphone first. He was a lean man with cold eyes and a voice that carried the authority of someone who had never been challenged, never been forced to question his own assumptions about worth and value. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gordon began, his voice echoing through the atrium. "We are here today to discuss efficiency improvements and cost-cutting measures that will position Blackwood Industries for continued growth." Marcus barely listened to the corporate speak about quarterly earnings and growth projections. His attention was fixed on Victoria, who stood to the side looking like a woman on the verge of collapse. Her hands trembled slightly, and she kept touching her throat in a gesture that seemed unconscious defensive. Then Gordon's tone shifted, becoming sharp and accusatory. "We have identified several areas where we are losing time and money," he announced, clicking to a slide that showed departmental breakdowns. "Custodial services is one of them." Marcus's grip tightened on the mop handle, his knuckles white against the worn metal. Specifically, Gordon continued, his eyes scanning the room until they found Marcus against the back wall. "We have had complaints about slow response times, incomplete tasks, general negligence." The word negligence hit Marcus like a slap. It was the same word that had destroyed his medical career, the same accusation that had followed him from operating rooms to janitors' closets. Marcus Sterling Gordon called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Step forward." The room went silent, 200 pairs of eyes turning to look at the man in the custodial uniform. Marcus didn't move immediately. This felt like a setup, like public humiliation disguised as corporate efficiency. "Sterling. Now." Marcus set the mop against the wall and walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Every face he passed was a study in corporate detachment, colleagues who would watch his destruction with the same interest they would show a quarterly report. He stopped 10 feet from the stage, directly in Gordon's line of sight. "You were assigned to the executive floors 3 weeks ago," Gordon said, consulting his tablet. "In that time you have been late, twice you left a conference room unlocked, and yesterday you failed to restock supplies in Miss Blackwood's office." Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. The accusations were mostly false, but in his experience the truth mattered less than the narrative those in power chose to tell. "Do you have an explanation?" Gordon pressed. "No, sir. I made mistakes. I'll fix them." Gordon laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "Fix them? You are a liability, frankly. I don't know why we hired you in the first place." A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at their phones, unwilling to witness what was clearly becoming a public execution. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Gordon demanded. Marcus raised his eyes, meeting Gordon's gaze directly. He had learned long ago not to show weakness to men like this, men who fed on the suffering of those they perceived as beneath them. "Are you even qualified for this job?" Gordon asked, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "Or did you lie on your application?" "I didn't lie." "Then what did you do before this? What's your work history?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Marcus could feel Victoria's eyes on him, could sense the weight of her knowledge pressing against the moment. "It's not relevant," he said quietly. "I'm making it relevant," Gordon snapped. "Answer the question." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I worked in healthcare." "Healthcare?" Gordon's voice dripped with skepticism. "Doing what, mopping floors there too?" Someone in the crowd snickered. The sound cut through Marcus like a blade. Not because it hurt him, but because it reminded him of everything he had lost. Everything these people would never understand about sacrifice and love, and the prices we pay for the people we refuse to abandon. "You are slow, you are sloppy, and you are wasting company resources," Gordon declared, his voice rising with the confidence of a man who believed his authority made him righteous. That's when the door at the back of the room burst open. Tyler ran in, his face red and streaked with tears, his small body moving with the desperate energy of a child in crisis. His teacher rushed in behind him, apologizing profusely, but Tyler didn't stop. He ran straight through the crowd of executives and managers and administrative staff straight to Marcus and wrapped his arms around his father's waist. "Dad," Tyler cried, his voice echoing through the silent atrium. Marcus knelt immediately, his hands gentle on Tyler's shoulders, his voice soft and reassuring, despite the public humiliation he had just endured. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" "They called from school." Tyler gasped between sobs. "You didn't answer your phone. I thought something happened to you. I thought someone hurt you." "I'm fine," Marcus said, pulling his son close. "I'm right here. No one's hurting me." "But they were being mean to you," Tyler whispered loud enough for the microphone to pick up. I could hear it in their voices. Marcus placed his hands on Tyler's small face, looking into eyes that were the same warm brown as his own. "It's okay, buddy. Sometimes adults have to have difficult conversations, but I'm okay." Gordon's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Who authorized a child to enter this building?" Tyler's teacher stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sir. There was a miscommunication at the school. When we couldn't reach Mr. Sterling," Tyler became upset and, "Get him out!" Gordon commanded. Tyler clung tighter to Marcus, his small body trembling. "Don't let them hurt you, Dad. No one's hurting me." Marcus said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm okay. I promise." But they were being mean. Tyler insisted, his child's sense of justice outraged by what he had witnessed. "That's not okay." Gordon pointed toward the exit. "Security, remove the child." That's when Victoria stood from her seat at the front of the room. She had been silent throughout the entire meeting, watching Marcus's humiliation with growing horror, seeing in his dignity and gentleness everything her father's lawsuit had tried to destroy. "Security," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like glass. "Remove Mr. Sterling and his son from the building, immediately." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Tyler started crying again, and Marcus picked him up, holding his son close as he turned toward the exit. He didn't say a word, didn't defend himself, didn't fight back. He just walked, carrying his child, maintaining his dignity, even as his world collapsed around him yet again. As he passed Victoria's position near the front, their eyes met for half a second. Hers were wet with tears she couldn't shed, filled with a pain that matched his own. In that brief moment, Marcus saw something that looked like recognition, like guilt, like the beginning of understanding. But he didn't stop walking. He couldn't afford to stop, not with Tyler in his arms, not with 200 people watching, not with the weight of his son's future pressing down on his shoulders like gravity itself. The atrium doors closed behind them with a soft click, sealing Marcus and Tyler away from the corporate world that had never been meant for men who chose love over power, sacrifice over success. Behind them, someone in the crowd whispered, "Did you see his shirt when he bent down to pick up the kid?" "Yeah," came the response. "Those definitely looked like wings." "Wait," said a third voice, realization dawning. "Isn't that what doctors get tattooed?" The murmur spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond, but Marcus and Tyler were already gone. Walking toward an uncertain future with nothing but each other, and the unshakable bond between a father and son who had learned that sometimes love means losing everything else. 2 hours had passed since the meeting. Marcus had taken Tyler back to school, apologized to the teacher for the disruption, and returned to collect his personal belongings from his locker. His uniform, his spare shoes, the small thermos Tyler had given him for Christmas, and tucked behind everything else the photo of Sarah he kept taped inside the metal door. She smiled at him from the photograph. Her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes bright with the laughter that had drawn him to her 15 years ago. The photo had been taken in their kitchen on a Sunday morning sunshine, streaming through the windows, Tyler toddling between them in footy pajamas covered with dinosaurs. That kitchen was gone now, sold along with everything else to pay for treatments that hadn't worked, hope that had proved futile, time that had run out too quickly. But Sarah's smile remained frozen in that moment when their life together had seemed infinite, unbreakable. Marcus closed his locker for the last time and walked toward the parking garage. He needed to figure out what came next, how to explain to Tyler that Dad had lost another job, how to make rent next month, how to keep moving forward when every step felt like walking through quicksand. But as he rounded the corner toward the elevator bank, he heard something that made his blood freeze. The building's fire alarm was shrieking, lights flashing red in the hallway. People rushed past him toward the exits, their voices sharp with panic and confusion. Emergency protocols activated automatically, sealing certain areas, redirecting foot traffic toward designated evacuation routes. Marcus grabbed his jacket and followed the crowd toward the main doors. Then he heard it, a voice faint and desperate coming from the direction of the stairwell. "Help! Someone please help!" Everyone else kept moving toward the exits, following training that said, "Get out first, let the professionals handle emergencies." But Marcus turned and ran toward the sound, his body moving before his mind could process the decision. The stairwell was filling with smoke, emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. He pulled his jacket over his nose and pushed through the door, the air thick and acrid, burning his lungs with each breath. On the landing between the 12th and 13th floors, 4 people were huddled against the wall. 3 men in expensive suits and Victoria Blackwood, sitting on the ground, gasping for air like a fish pulled from water. Her inhaler lay on the floor beside her, empty. Marcus took the stairs 2 at a time, his medical training overriding years of suppressed instincts. He dropped to his knees in front of Victoria, his hands immediately going to her wrists to check her pulse, rapid, thready, irregular. "What happened?" he asked the men. Though his attention remained focused on Victoria. The elevator stopped between floors. One of them answered, his voice tight with panic. She started having trouble breathing right away. "Asthma attack, I think." Marcus nodded, his mind shifting into the clinical detachment that had once made him one of the best pediatric surgeons on the East Coast. Asthma, Victoria tried to nod, her lips pale, her chest heaving with shallow, rapid breaths that weren't bringing enough oxygen to her blood. "Where's your backup inhaler?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Victoria shook her head weakly, her eyes wide with the kind of panic that comes when your body betrays you in the most fundamental way, when breathing, the most basic function of life, becomes impossible. Marcus looked at the three men. "Get out now. Use the stairs. Stay low under the smoke. Move." They hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving their CEO, but Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions. They went. Alone with Victoria in the smoke-filled stairwell, Marcus placed one hand on her chest and the other on her back, feeling the erratic rhythm of her breathing, the way her muscles fought against themselves. "Look at me," he said, his voice calm and steady, despite the chaos around them. "Victoria, look at me." She tried, her grey eyes unfocused and frightened. "Count to 4, Marcus instructed. "Breathe in through your nose slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. She couldn't do it. The panic was feeding the asthma feeding the panic, a vicious cycle that would kill her if he couldn't break it. "Yes, you can," Marcus said firmly, "with me. Watch my lips. 1. He breathed with her, exaggerating the movements, giving her something to focus on besides the smoke and fear and the feeling that she was drowning in air. It was a technique he had learned working with children, a way to break through panic and establish control. 2, 3, 4. Good. Now hold it. 1, 2. Now out slowly. Victoria's body trembled with the effort, but she followed his lead, her breathing beginning to slow fractionally. "We have to move," Marcus said, when she could manage a few consecutive breaths. "Can you stand?" Victoria nodded weakly. Marcus pulled her arm over his shoulder and lifted her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they began the slow descent. 13 flights of stairs with a woman who couldn't breathe properly, through smoke that grew thicker with each floor. They made it to the 10th floor, then the 9th. Victoria leaned heavily against him, her breathing easier now that they were below the worst of the smoke, her body beginning to recover from the panic that had nearly killed her. By the 7th floor, she was breathing almost normally. At the ground level, firefighters met them at the door, immediately taking Victoria and guiding her toward a waiting ambulance. Another firefighter grabbed Marcus's arm. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus said, though his lungs burned from the smoke and his shirt was soaked with sweat. The firefighter looked at him like he was crazy, then shrugged. "You sure acted like you knew what you were doing in there. You a paramedic?" "No," Marcus said quietly. "Huh. Well, you probably saved her life." Marcus didn't respond. He walked toward the edge of the parking lot, away from the crowd, away from the cameras that were already arriving, away from Victoria Blackwood and the complicated history that connected them. Tyler would be getting out of school in 3 hours. Marcus needed to figure out what to tell him, how to explain that Dad had lost another job, how to make everything okay when nothing felt okay anymore. He didn't see Victoria watching him from the back of the ambulance, an oxygen mask over her face, and something like recognition dawning in her eyes. He didn't hear her ask the paramedic who he was, or see the way she stared after him as he disappeared into the afternoon crowd. but the wings tattooed on his chest felt warm against his skin, as if Sarah were there with him, reminding him that healing was a calling, not just a profession, and that some things like the instinct to save a life could never be taken away, no matter how much the world tried to destroy the man who carried them. Victoria found him in the parking garage that evening, loading a cardboard box into the trunk of an old sedan that had seen better years. His work boots, his thermos, the photo of Sarah, everything that had once filled his employee locker, everything that represented his brief return to having a place in the world. Marcus. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her voice. His movements were deliberate and controlled the actions of a man who had learned to contain his emotions behind walls of necessity. "I need to talk to you. There's nothing to talk about." His voice was flat, empty of inflection. He closed the trunk and faced her for the first time. "You fired me in front of 200 people while my son was crying. I'd say we are done talking." Victoria stepped closer, and he could see that she had changed out of her business suit into jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and without the corporate armor, she looked younger, more vulnerable. More like the 8-year-old girl who had trusted him to save her life. "I know who you are," she said. Marcus went completely still, his hand resting on the car door handle. "Stop. I know you were a surgeon. I know what happened at St. Augustine. I know my father—" "Stop." The word came out sharp, final. "You don't know anything." "I was the patient," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "I was 8 years old. You saved my life." Marcus looked at her, then really looked, his eyes moving to the base of her throat, where the collar of her sweater covered the scar he had made 16 years ago. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, not just of her face, older now, but still carrying traces of the frightened child she had been, but of the weight of everything that had happened since. "I didn't know it was you," Victoria continued, tears streaming down her face. "Not until yesterday. I found the files, I saw the lawsuit. My father—" Her voice broke completely. "Your father did what rich men do," Marcus said quietly. "He punished someone who made his daughter less than perfect. I was a child. I didn't understand. But you signed the lawsuit when you turned 18. The words were delivered without emotion, but they hit Victoria like a slap. "How did you—" "Because I remember every name on that document," Marcus said. "Especially yours. I remember because signing those papers when you became an adult meant you chose to keep destroying my life, even when you were old enough to ask questions." The parking garage was silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the harsh echo of their voices against concrete walls. Victoria swayed on her feet as if his words had physically struck her. "I have to pick up my son," Marcus said, turning back to his car. "Wait, please." "For what?" "So you can apologize, so you can feel better about yourself." "I want to fix this." Marcus spun around, his composure finally cracking. "You can't fix this!" His voice echoed off the concrete walls, raw with 16 years of suppressed rage. "You can't fix 7 years of my life. You can't bring back my wife. You can't undo the fact that she died thinking I was a failure." Victoria took a step back, her face pale with shock. "You can't fix the nights I worked 18 hours straight because I needed every dollar I could scrape together while you were building a fortune on the grave of my career." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "You can't fix the times. Tyler asked me why other kids' dads had important jobs, and I had to lie to him because the truth was too complicated for a 7-year-old. "I didn't know about your wife," Victoria whispered. "You didn't want to know." Marcus shot back. "You wanted someone to blame for not being perfect, and I was convenient." "That's not—" she started, but Marcus cut her off. "My wife had cancer. Stage 4. I quit my job to take care of her. I sold our house to pay for treatments that didn't work. And while I was watching her die, Your lawyers were taking everything else I had left." Victoria covered her mouth with her hand, her face crumpling with grief for people she had never met, for pain she had helped cause without understanding its scope. She asked me once why I didn't fight back, why I didn't defend myself against your accusations. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. I told her it didn't matter, that as long as we had each other, I didn't need anything else. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, the gesture angry and vulnerable. She died believing I had hurt people, that I had failed at the thing I loved most, that I wasn't good enough. The words came out broken, each one a piece of his heart laid bare in the fluorescent lighting of a corporate parking garage. Victoria was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Let me help you get your license back. Let me. I don't want your guilt money." Marcus interrupted. "I don't want your charity. I don't want anything from you except to be left alone." "Then what do you want?" Victoria asked desperately. Marcus got into his car and started the engine. Through the windshield, he looked at her one last time. "I want you to leave me alone." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Victoria's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees on the oil-stained concrete, her expensive jeans absorbing the grime of a place that had never been designed for moments of reckoning. "Then let me earn it," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "Let me earn your forgiveness." Marcus stared down at her through the windshield, seeing a powerful woman broken by the weight of inherited guilt, reduced to begging on the floor of a parking garage. "Stand up," he said through the rolled-down window. She didn't move. "Stand up. You are embarrassing yourself. I won't stand until you let me try. There's nothing to try." His voice was cold now, empty. "We are done." Marcus backed out of the parking space and drove away, leaving Victoria on her knees in the garage. He didn't look at her in the rearview mirror, didn't see the way she stayed there long after his tail lights disappeared. Her body racked with sobs for a marriage that had ended in poverty and grief, for a child who thought his father was a failure, for a man whose wings had been clipped by her family's pride and her own willful ignorance. The security cameras recorded everything, but Victoria didn't care. Let the whole world see what she had been reduced to, what she had always been, underneath the suits and the power and the money. Someone who had built her life on the destruction of a man who had saved it. She stayed there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, until her knees were numb from the cold concrete and her tears had run dry. Finally, she stood, her legs stiff and unsteady, and walked to her own car with the slow, careful steps of someone learning to carry a weight she had never felt before. That night, she would make a decision that would change everything. But for now, she just drove home in silence, carrying the echo of Marcus Sterling's voice and the image of Tyler clinging to his father's waist, asking why people were being mean to the man who was his whole world. Some truths Victoria was learning demanded payment in full, and she was just beginning to understand the price of 16 years of willful blindness. Friends, I need to pause our story here for just a moment, because what happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice, forgiveness, and second chances. If you are finding yourself moved by Marcus and Tyler's journey, if you are feeling the weight of what happens when power silences truth, then I want you to know you are not alone. Hit that like button if this story is touching your heart. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss these powerful stories of hope and healing. And please share this with someone who needs to remember that even in our darkest moments, redemption is still possible. Because sometimes the most broken people become the strongest healers. Now let's continue and see how love can transform even the deepest wounds. The story broke 3 days later while Marcus was at the grocery store, Tyler holding his hand as they navigated the produce section. Marcus's phone started buzzing with notifications, texts from unknown numbers, voicemails from reporters, social media alerts that made no sense. By the time they got home, 2 news vans were parked outside their apartment building. Marcus pulled Tyler through the back entrance, his heart pounding as he recognized the predatory energy of a media feeding frenzy. Inside their small apartment, he turned on the television and felt his world tilt off its axis. Every channel ran the same story. Billionaire CEO kneels in parking garage apology or PR stunt. The security footage had leaked somehow. There was Victoria on her knees on the oil-stained concrete. There was Marcus driving away without looking back. The images played on an endless loop, accompanied by breathless commentary about corporate power dynamics and public humiliation. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Tyler asked, pressing close to Marcus on their worn couch. "No, buddy," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around his son. "The reporters will leave soon." But they didn't leave. By morning, there were twice as many. Reporters knocked on neighbors' doors asking about the mysterious janitor who had rejected a billionaire's apology. They offered money for information, for photos, for any detail that might flesh out the human interest story that was dominating social media. Marcus stopped answering his phone and spent the day applying for jobs online. Every application asked the same question. "Have you ever been involved in a lawsuit?" He clicked yes every time and watched his hopes disappear into algorithms designed to filter out liability. No one called back. On Thursday, Tyler came home with a black eye and skinned knuckles. "What happened?" Marcus asked, kneeling to examine his son's injuries. Tyler's lower lip trembled. "Jimmy Brennan said you were a liar. He said his mom saw you on TV and you hurt people. He said you were probably a criminal." Marcus felt rage rise in his throat like acid. "What did you do?" "I pushed him. I told him he was wrong about you, but he kept saying it." Tyler's voice broke. "Dad, why do people think you are bad?" Marcus pulled his son into his arms, feeling the weight of 16 years of injustice pressing down on both of them. "Sometimes people believe stories without knowing if they are true, buddy. It's easier than asking questions. But you didn't hurt anyone, right? You help people." The simple faith in Tyler's voice nearly broke Marcus's composure. "I tried to help people, yes. Then why don't you tell them? Why don't you explain?" Marcus looked at his son's bruised face and realized that his silence, his dignity, his refusal to defend himself was no longer just about him. Tyler was paying the price for his father's past fighting battles he didn't understand against accusations he couldn't answer. "Do you miss being a doctor?" Tyler asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them like a bridge Marcus had been afraid to cross. "Every day." "Then why don't you go back?" Marcus didn't have an answer. For 7 years he had told himself that the door was permanently closed, that his medical career was a chapter he could never reopen. But Tyler's question forced him to examine whether that was really true, or whether it was just easier than facing the possibility of another failure. That night, an email arrived that would change everything. Subject line: Medical Review Report, case number 20847. Marcus opened it with trembling hands and found a 20-page document that dismantled every accusation made against him 16 years ago. Expert testimony from 3 independent surgeons. Analysis of surgical records that proved his techniques were not only sound, but exemplary. Character references from former colleagues who had been too afraid to speak up during the original investigation. The conclusion was damning in its clarity. No evidence of negligence or malpractice. Dr. Marcus Sterling's actions were consistent with accepted medical standards. Allegations appear motivated by external pressures rather than medical fact. At the bottom of the report, submitted to State Medical Board for review. Hearing scheduled for 6 weeks from today. No signature, no name. But Marcus knew who had sent it. Outside, a car had been sitting at the end of the block for hours. Victoria Blackwood watching the apartment building from a distance, waiting for something she couldn't name. The investigative piece went viral on Monday morning. A journalist named Catherine Walsh had spent the weekend digging through public records, court filings, and hospital archives. Her article titled, "The Doctor Who Lost Everything and the Billionaire Who Took It," appeared on the front page of the city's major newspaper and spread across social media like wildfire. Marcus didn't read it initially. He heard about it from the school principal, who called to say that several parents were demanding Tyler be moved to a different classroom. Not because they thought Marcus was dangerous, but because the media attention was disrupting their children's education. Marcus picked Tyler up early, pushing through a crowd of reporters who had discovered the school pickup location. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, voices shouted questions designed to provoke emotional responses. "Mr. Sterling, do you blame Victoria Blackwood for your wife's death? Are you planning to sue for damages? How does it feel to have your story vindicated?" Marcus shielded Tyler and pushed through the crowd without speaking. Someone grabbed his arm. He pulled free without breaking stride. In the car, Tyler was crying again. "Why won't they leave us alone?" Tyler sobbed. "Because people like stories more than truth, buddy. And right now, we are a story." That evening, Marcus finally read Catherine Walsh's article. Every detail was accurate, meticulously researched, devastating in its implications. She had tracked down former colleagues who confirmed Marcus's reputation. She had found the hospital board minutes from the meetings where Victoria's father had pressured for Marcus's dismissal. She had even located the original surgical records that proved the operation had been performed flawlessly. The article painted a picture of institutional corruption of wealth using its influence to destroy an innocent man of a medical career sacrificed on the altar of one family's wounded pride. By evening, Marcus's phone was ringing constantly, lawyers offering to file lawsuits, talk show producers wanting interviews, medical colleagues who had been silent for 16 years suddenly eager to offer support and apologies. Marcus deleted them all. At 8 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. Not the aggressive pounding of reporters, but a soft, hesitant tap. Marcus opened it to find a woman in her 50s holding an official-looking folder. "Dr. Sterling, I'm Janet Morrison from the State Medical Board." Marcus's heart stopped. "I'm not a doctor anymore." "That may be changing," she said gently. "May I come in?" She handed him the folder, and Marcus opened it with hands that shook like leaves. Inside was a letter bearing the State Medical Board's official seal. "The State Medical Board has reviewed your case based on new evidence submitted by an anonymous party," Marcus read aloud. "A formal hearing has been scheduled for November 14th to determine license reinstatement." He looked up at Janet Morrison, unable to process what he was reading. "This is real, very real. Someone went to considerable trouble to compile the evidence in your favor. Medical experts, legal analysis, character testimonies. It's the most comprehensive review package I've seen in 20 years. Who submitted it? I'm not at liberty to say, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Whoever it was has significant resources and legal expertise. They wanted to make sure this was done right." After she left, Marcus sat with the letter, while Tyler climbed beside him on the couch. "What does it say, Dad? It says I might get to be a doctor again." "Really?" Tyler's eyes went wide with wonder. "Maybe Buddy. Maybe." Across town, Victoria sat in her attorney's office, while 3 men in expensive suits delivered news she had been expecting. "The board voted unanimously," her attorney said. "They want your resignation effective immediately." Victoria nodded. She had known this was coming from the moment the security footage leaked, from the moment she had made the decision to kneel in that parking garage and accept responsibility for her family's actions. "If you fight this, it'll get ugly," another board member warned. "The shareholders are already nervous. The publicity has been..." "Let it get ugly," Victoria said quietly. "I'm not resigning." "Victoria, be reasonable. Your reputation— My reputation was built on a lie. She interrupted. I'm not protecting it anymore. Then what are you doing? Victoria stood and gathered her purse, her movements deliberate and calm. I'm stepping down voluntarily. There's a difference. What difference? One is about protecting myself. The other is about doing what's right. She walked out of the meeting and drove to the parking garage where everything had changed 3 days ago. Someone had spray-painted words across her reserved parking spot. You destroyed him. Victoria stared at the accusation, then got back in her car and drove to Marcus's neighborhood. She parked across the street from his building and sat in the dark, watching the third-floor window where warm light spilled through thin curtains. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Leave him alone. He doesn't want your apology. Victoria stared at the message, then typed back. I know. Another message appeared. Then why are you here? Victoria looked around the empty street, realizing someone was watching her. Watch Marcus's building. She typed, because I owe him more than an apology. I owe him justice. The response came quickly. Justice doesn't fix what's broken. No, Victoria typed back, but it's a start. She started her car and drove away, leaving Marcus's street quiet again. But the seed of an idea had been planted, a possibility that had been growing in her mind since the moment she had read his medical records and understood the full scope of what her family had done. Justice might not fix what was broken, but she was about to discover that sometimes, when delivered with enough courage and public accountability, it could at least clear the ground for healing to begin. The press conference was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on Thursday at the Blackwood Industries headquarters. Victoria stood backstage in the building where she had humiliated Marcus just weeks ago, listening to the crowd of reporters gather in the main atrium. 300 seats all filled. Cameras lined the back wall like cannons aimed at truth. Her publicist, her attorney, and her board of directors had all advised against this. They had offered alternatives, written statements, charitable donations, quiet settlements that would make the problem disappear. But Victoria had learned something in that parking garage, kneeling on oil-stained concrete, while Marcus Sterling drove away from her. Some debts couldn't be paid quietly. Some wrongs demanded public reckoning. You don't have to do this, her publicist said for the 10th time. Yes, Victoria said, adjusting her jacket. I do. She walked onto the stage where Gordon Hayes had humiliated Marcus in front of 200 employees. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was the same space where her company had tried to destroy a man's dignity, and now it would be the place where she tried to restore it. Camera flashes exploded like lightning as she approached the podium. The crowd fell silent, waiting. My name is Victoria Blackwood. She began, her voice steady and clear. 16 years ago, Dr. Marcus Sterling saved my life. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the corporate apology they had expected. I was 8 years old. I had a congenital heart defect that would have killed me without immediate surgery. Dr. Sterling performed that surgery with skill and precision that gave me a future. Victoria reached for the top button of her blouse. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained strong. This is what my father called disfigurement. She unbuttoned her blouse, revealing the thin scar that ran from her collarbone toward her heart. This is what he used to destroy a man's career. Cameras zoomed in on the scar, not a disfigurement, but a lifeline proof of a miracle performed by hands that had later been forced to hold mop handles instead of scalpels. My father was a powerful man. Victoria continued. He sat on the hospital board. When he decided Dr. Sterling's work wasn't perfect enough for his daughter, he filed a lawsuit claiming negligence. She pulled medical records from the folder on the podium. These surgical reports confirmed that Dr. Sterling performed the procedure flawlessly. There was no malpractice, no negligence, no error, only a scar that my father couldn't accept. A reporter raised her hand, but Victoria kept speaking. I was 18 when I was asked to sign the lawsuit renewal. I was old enough to ask questions, old enough to read the medical records, old enough to understand what we were doing to an innocent man. Her voice caught. I signed anyway because I trusted my father's judgment more than I trusted my own conscience. The room was completely silent now. While my father was destroying Dr. Sterling's career, Dr. Sterling was watching his wife die of cancer. He quit medicine to care for her full-time. He sold their home to pay for treatments. When she passed away, he had lost everything: his career, his wife, his financial security. Victoria gripped the podium, her knuckles white. I employed Dr. Sterling as a janitor. I didn't know who he was. I humiliated him, fired him, and treated him as disposable. All while he cleaned the floors of a building bought with profits from a company that had destroyed his life. She held up a check, the amount clearly visible, to the camera's $15 million. This money is going to the National Medical Justice Fund, an organization that supports doctors who have been wrongfully accused. It's not enough, but it's a start. Applause began, but Victoria raised her hand to stop it. I'm not finished. I've submitted comprehensive evidence to the State Medical Board requesting a full review of Dr. Sterling's case. If they reinstate his license, I will fund a clinic in his name, free pediatric care for children who need it most. The applause was louder now, but Victoria's expression remained serious. Dr. Sterling doesn't know I'm doing this. He didn't ask for it. He told me he wants nothing from me, and I respect that. But I'm doing it anyway because some debts can't be paid privately. Some wrongs demand public acknowledgement. She stepped back from the podium, then returned to it one more time. Dr. Marcus Sterling saved over 300 children during his career. He saved me. We repaid him by taking everything. That ends today. Victoria walked off stage without taking questions, without waiting for applause, without looking back. Her driver was waiting in the parking garage. Where to Miss Blackwood home, she said. Then, after a moment, numb. To Riverside Park. The article hit news websites within an hour, accompanied by the video of Victoria revealing her scar and reading Marcus's vindication into the public record. Social media exploded with support for Marcus' condemnation of the medical malpractice system and grudging respect for Victoria's public accountability. Marcus found out about the press conference from Tyler's teacher, who called to tell him the school had been flooded with calls from reporters wanting statements. Marcus turned off his phone and took Tyler to the park instead, pushing his son on swings while the world debated their story around them. Dad Tyler said as Marcus pushed him higher into the afternoon sky. Do you think the lady feels sorry now? Marcus watched his son soar through the air, fearless and trusting, and thought about Victoria, kneeling in a parking garage, about the scar she had revealed to cameras, about the weight of carrying someone else's pain for 16 years without understanding where it came from. I think she's learning what sorry really means, buddy. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. Marcus said honestly. But it's something. Above them, clouds moved across the sky like pages turning in a story that wasn't finished yet, and Marcus Sterling began to imagine for the first time in 7 years that maybe, just maybe, he might get to be a doctor again. Marcus found Victoria sitting on a bench in Riverside Park 3 days later wearing jeans and a plain sweater that made her look more human than he had ever seen her. It was early morning, the kind of quiet hour when the city belonged to joggers and dog walkers and people who needed space to think. She didn't look up when he approached, just shifted slightly to make room on the bench. Marcus sat down, leaving space between them, and for a long time neither of them spoke. I didn't think you'd come, Victoria said finally. I almost didn't. Why did you... Marcus watched a jogger pass by, earphones blocking out the world focused on forward motion. Because my son asked me if people can change. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know. A breeze moved through the trees above them, scattering leaves that drifted down like confetti from a celebration no one had planned. The morning light was soft, forgiving, the kind that made even difficult conversations feel possible. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Victoria said quietly. "Good." She flinched slightly at his directness but didn't retreat. "But I need you to know something. That press conference wasn't about making myself feel better, wasn't it?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. Maybe partly, but mostly it was about making sure the world knows who you really are. Marcus turned to look at her for the first time. "I know who I am. But Tyler doesn't, not completely. And someday he'll be old enough to search your name online to read about the lawsuit and the accusations." Her voice broke slightly. "I wanted to make sure he finds the truth instead of the lies." The words hit Marcus harder than he had expected. He thought about Tyler's black eye, about the playground fights over things his son didn't understand, about the day when Tyler would be old enough to grasp the full scope of what had been stolen from his family. "I spent 16 years living with a version of the story that made me the victim," Victoria continued. "My father told me you had made a mistake, that you had scarred his perfect daughter, that you were careless with something precious. I believed him because it was easier than asking questions. You were 18 when you signed that renewal," Marcus said. "Old enough to ask those questions." "You're right." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "I was old enough and I chose not to. I was a coward." They sat without speaking while the park came alive around them. Children's laughter from a nearby playground, the distant sound of traffic birds calling from branches that had survived countless seasons of death and renewal. "The medical board hearing is in 3 weeks, Marcus said eventually. "I know. If they reinstate my license, will you really fund the clinic?" Victoria turned to face him fully. "Every word of what I said at that press conference was true. No strings attached, no conditions, just a place where you can do what you were meant to do." "And what if I can't remember how? What if 16 years of being out of medicine has left me?" "You remembered during the fire," Victoria said quietly. "You saved my life in that stairwell. Your hands knew exactly what to do." Marcus looked down at his hands, hands that had performed countless surgeries, that had held dying patients and delivered miracles that had been reduced to cleaning toilets and emptying trash cans. That was instinct. Exactly. Some things can't be taken away, no matter how hard the world tries. Victoria stood slowly. "If you do get your license back, I want you to know something. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you justice. A chance to practice medicine the way you are supposed to, without insurance companies dictating your decisions, without wealthy families threatening lawsuits, without anyone questioning your competence based on their own fears." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Marcus." He looked up. "If you do this, if you come back to medicine, I'm not doing it for you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'm doing it because that 8-year-old girl you saved grew up to become someone who destroyed the best doctor she ever met. And if I don't fix that, if I don't make it right, then I'll spend the rest of my life being the woman who was too proud to say thank you to the man who gave her a future." She walked away across the grass, her footsteps soft on the morning earth. Marcus stayed on the bench for another hour, watching the park fill with families and lovers and solitary people seeking peace in the space between earth and sky. When he finally went home, he found Tyler at the kitchen table working on a drawing for art class. It was a picture of a man in a white coat with wings on his chest, surrounded by children who were smiling. "What's this, buddy?" "It's you," Tyler said proudly. "When you are a doctor again. Mrs. Peterson said we should draw what we hope for, not just what we have." Marcus studied the drawing, the careful way Tyler had drawn the stethoscope, the bright colors he had used for the children's faces, the wings that looked more like hope than ink. "Do you really think I'll be a doctor again?" Marcus asked. Tyler looked up with eyes that held no doubt, no fear, no understanding of how hard the world could be on dreams. "You are already a doctor, Dad. You just haven't been allowed to show people yet." That night, Marcus called the number Janet Morrison had given him and scheduled a meeting to discuss what license reinstatement would actually mean, what additional training might be required, what hospitals might consider hiring him, what it would take to build a practice again after 7 years away. For the first time since Sarah died, he allowed himself to imagine walking into a hospital wearing scrubs instead of a uniform, holding a surgical instrument instead of a mop, saving lives instead of just surviving them. It felt like the first deep breath he had taken in years. Outside his window, the city sparkled with lights that looked like stars if you squinted just right, and Marcus Sterling began to believe that maybe, just maybe, broken wings could learn to fly again. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of possibility, and somewhere across town, Victoria Blackwood was making phone calls to architects and medical supply companies, designing a clinic that would stand as a monument to second chances, and the belief that some mistakes, no matter how old, could still be made right. The hearing room was smaller than Marcus had expected. 20 chairs arranged in neat rows, 5 board members, seated behind a mahogany table that spoke of authority and gravitas. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor where Marcus's future would be decided. Tyler sat beside him in his best school uniform, navy blue, with a crisp white shirt and his lucky dinosaur tie that Marcus had helped him knot that morning. The boy had insisted on coming, had argued with the passion of someone who believed his presence could influence destiny itself. "I want to be there when they tell you you are a doctor again," Tyler had said over breakfast, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Someone from our family should be there for the good news, since Mom can't be." Now Tyler swung his legs nervously, his small hand clasped in Marcus's larger one, both of them trying to project confidence, while their hearts hammered against their ribs like birds desperate for flight. Dr. Margaret Chen, the board chairman, cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had spent decades making decisions that mattered to other people's lives. "This hearing is to review the case of Dr. Marcus Sterling, license number 447291, revoked in 2018, pending investigation of alleged malpractice." Her voice carried through the small room with official weight. "Dr. Sterling, please stand." Marcus rose, his legs unsteady for a moment. Tyler squeezed his hand before letting go. "We have reviewed the evidence submitted on your behalf," Dr. Chen continued. "Medical records, expert testimony, character references, and an independent analysis of the surgical procedure in question." She picked up a thick folder, the same evidence Victoria had compiled and submitted anonymously, though everyone in the room probably suspected its source. "The panel also interviewed 3 of your former colleagues, all of whom testified to your exceptional skill and ethical standards during your tenure at St. Augustine Children's Hospital." Marcus's throat felt dry. He could hear Tyler breathing beside him, quick and shallow with excitement and nervousness. "We have reviewed the testimony from 3 independent medical experts regarding the surgery performed on Victoria Blackwood in 2007. Dr. Harrison from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Patel from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and Dr. Rodriguez from Boston Children's all reached the same conclusion." Dr. Chen removed her glasses and looked directly at Marcus. "The surgery was executed flawlessly. The post-operative scarring was within normal parameters for the procedure required. There is no evidence of negligence, malpractice, or substandard care." The room felt airless. Marcus could hear the blood rushing in his ears. "Furthermore, Dr. Chen continued, "the panel has found evidence that the original complaint was filed not based on medical concerns, but on personal dissatisfaction with aesthetic outcomes that were according to expert testimony, unavoidable given the emergency nature of the surgery required." Tyler's hand found Marcus's. Again, small fingers gripping tight. The investigation also revealed that pressure was applied to the hospital administration by individuals in positions of financial influence, pressure that may have compromised the objectivity of the original review process. Dr. Chen stood, and the other 4 board members followed her lead. Dr. Marcus Sterling, she said, her voice carrying the weight of justice delayed, but not denied, on behalf of this board and on behalf of the State Medical Licensing Authority. I offer our sincere apologies for the injustice you have suffered. Marcus's vision blurred. 16 years of shame, of doubt, of wondering if maybe he really had failed that 8-year-old girl, all of it dissolved in those words. Your medical license is hereby reinstated effective immediately, with full privileges and no restrictions. The room erupted in applause from the small gallery of observers, medical colleagues who had come to show support, reporters covering the story, and strangers who had been following Marcus's journey through the media coverage. But Marcus couldn't hear any of it over the sound of Tyler's voice, bright with joy and vindication. Dad, they said you are a doctor again. Marcus knelt and pulled his son into his arms. Both of them crying now, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen clearly after years of living under a cloud of false accusations. Dr. Chen approached with an official document, Marcus's new license complete with state seal and his license number restored. His hands shook as he took it, the paper feeling both weightless and heavy with possibility. Congratulations, Dr. Sterling, she said warmly. Medicine has missed you. Tyler examined the license with wonder, tracing his finger along the embossed seal. It says doctor right here, Dad. It's official. Yeah, buddy. Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. It's official. At the back of the room, Victoria Blackwood stood near the door, dressed simply in a grey suit. Her presence unremarkable, except to those who knew her story. She had watched the entire proceedings in silence, her hand pressed over her heart when the verdict was announced. Marcus looked up and saw her there, their eyes meeting across the crowded room. She placed her hand over her heart and nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement of completion of a debt finally paid. Marcus nodded back, and in that small exchange, something that had been broken between them, something that had poisoned both their lives for 16 years, finally began to heal. Tyler noticed the silent communication. Dad, should we say hi to her? Marcus looked down at his son. At the hope in those young eyes that saw possibility where adults saw only complication. Yeah, he said quietly. I think we should. They walked through the crowd of well-wishers and reporters, Tyler leading the way with the fearless determination of a child on a mission. Victoria watched them approach, her composed expression wavering slightly. Tyler spoke first, his voice clear and sincere. Thank you for helping my dad get his doctor job back. Victoria's voice broke when she answered. You are welcome, Tyler. Your dad is a really good doctor. I know, Tyler said with simple confidence. He's the best. Marcus extended his hand to Victoria, a gesture that felt monumental after everything they had been through. Thank you, he said quietly. Victoria took his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. You don't have to thank me for fixing something I helped break. Maybe not, Marcus said, but I'm doing it anyway. Tyler grabbed both their hands, his small fingers linking them together in a chain of connection that bridged past and future pain and healing. Can we get ice cream now? He asked. To celebrate, Marcus looked at Victoria, raising an eyebrow in question. I don't want to intrude on your celebration, she said carefully. You are not intruding, Tyler said, with the absolute authority of childhood. You are family now. Dad says that's what happens when people help each other through hard things. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she couldn't quite suppress. I'd love to get ice cream, she managed. The three of them walked out of the hearing room together, past reporters shouting questions, past colleagues offering congratulations, past the bureaucratic machinery that had finally belatedly served justice instead of power. For the first time in 7 years, Marcus Sterling was officially, legally, irrevocably a doctor again. But more importantly, for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he might be ready to start living again instead of just surviving. And Tyler, walking between the two adults who had found their way to forgiveness through his innocent insistence on second chances, chatted excitedly about flavors and toppings and the simple joy of celebrating good news with people you care about. The future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten prescription waiting to be filled with all the healing they could manage to create together. The Carson Blackwood Children's Clinic opened on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after Marcus's license was reinstated. The building sat on the east side of the city, 3 stories of red brick and steel with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in light like hope itself. Across the front wall, an artist named Elena Vasquez had painted a mural of wings, not the broken wings Marcus carried on his chest, but whole ones spread wide, painted in shades of blue and gold that caught the morning sun like stained glass. Children walking past would stop and point, asking their parents why there were wings on the doctor building, and the parents would tell them it was because sometimes healing required learning to fly again. Inside the waiting room smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Toys filled colorful bins in every corner, blocks and books and puzzles chosen specifically to distract frightened children from whatever had brought them here. The walls were painted in warm colors that psychologists had proven reduced anxiety, and comfortable chairs were arranged to encourage families to talk to each other while they waited. Marcus stood in examination room 3, wearing a white coat for the first time in 7 years. His name was embroidered over the left pocket in blue thread. Dr. Marcus Sterling, MD, Chief of Pediatric Surgery. The title still felt foreign on his chest, like clothing that didn't quite fit, despite being tailored specifically for him. "Still feels strange," Victoria asked from the doorway. She wore khakis and a clinic polo shirt with the logo they had designed together, stylized wings surrounding a heart. She was no longer a billionaire CEO, she was the clinic's operations director, a title that required her to understand insurance forms and supply orders and the daily mechanics of actually caring for patients rather than managing shareholders. "Strange good or strange bad?" Marcus asked, adjusting his stethoscope. "Strange real," Marcus said. "I keep expecting someone to tell me there's been a mistake." Victoria smiled, the expression more genuine than any he had seen during her corporate days. "No mistake. You belong here." Tyler ran past in the hallway, his voice carrying as he called to one of the nurses about a game they had been playing. He was 8 now, taller and more confident, spending every afternoon at the clinic after school. The staff had adopted him as their unofficial mascot, and he took the responsibility seriously, helping to put nervous young patients at ease with his easy chatter and encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaurs. The clinic had seen 43 patients in its first month, 68 in its second. By October, they were booked 3 weeks in advance, word spreading through the community about the place where children could get excellent medical care, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Marcus worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, but it didn't feel like the exhausting grind of his previous double-shift existence. This was different. This was calling purpose, the chance to use his hands for what they had been trained to do, rather than just surviving until the next day. One afternoon, a mother brought in her 5-year-old daughter Emma, who had been born with a heart defect similar to the one Victoria had faced 16 years earlier. The little girl was pale and tired, her lips slightly blue, with the telltale signs of oxygen deprivation. "She'll need surgery," Marcus told the mother gently, his hand steady as he reviewed the echocardiogram results. "It's the same procedure I've done many times before. The success rate is excellent." The mother's face went white with panic and financial dread. "How much will it cost?" Marcus set down his tablet and looked directly into her eyes. Nothing. That's what we do here. The woman started crying, not from fear this time, but from relief so profound it couldn't be contained. I don't understand. How can it cost nothing? Because someone believes that a child's life shouldn't depend on their parents' bank account. Marcus said simply. 2 weeks later, Emma's surgery was a complete success. Marcus performed the delicate work with hands that remembered every movement, every angle, every subtle technique that made the difference between life and death. When he emerged from the operating room to tell the family that everything had gone perfectly, the mother hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my baby." Marcus thought about Victoria as an 8-year-old, about the fear in her eyes before her own surgery, about the scar she had hidden for decades because her father had taught her to see it as disfigurement rather than deliverance. "It's what we do," he said. That evening after his shift ended, Marcus found Victoria in her office, going over budget reports and supply orders, her hair pulled back in a ponytail and reading glasses perched on her nose. The corporate power suits and boardroom authority were gone, replaced by someone who looked content in a way that had nothing to do with stock prices or quarterly reports. "Emma's doing well," he reported, settling into the chair across from her desk. "That's the 4th one this month," Victoria said, looking up from her spreadsheets. "5th, actually." Victoria set down her pen and studied his face. "You are not sleeping enough." "I'm fine, Marcus," she said gently, using the tone that had replaced her corporate authority with something more personal, more real. "You are going to burn out if you keep this pace." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering her concern. "Every time I think about taking a break, I remember what it felt like to not be able to do this work. I remember 7 years of emptying trash cans while children needed surgery." "I can't stop." "You don't have to stop," Victoria said. "But you do have to pace yourself. This clinic is going to serve children for decades, not just months. We need you to be sustainable." Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the city skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the wing mural glow like it was lit from within. Tyler appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder, ready to go home. "Dad, are we going to dinner? I'm hungry, and you promised we would try that new pizza place." "Yeah, buddy," Marcus said, standing and reaching for his jacket. "Let's go." Victoria walked them to the front door, her evening ritual of making sure the building was secure before going home to her own apartment. As they stepped outside into the cool autumn air, Tyler looked up at the mural. "Dad, do you think Mom knows about the clinic?" Marcus stopped walking and knelt to his son's level, his hands gentle on Tyler's shoulders. "I think she knows, buddy. I think she's proud of both of us." Tyler smiled, the expression bright and uncomplicated. "Good, because I think what we are doing here is really important." They drove home through streets lined with trees beginning their autumn transformation, past other families heading to their own dinners and evening routines, past the ordinary miracle of people taking care of the people they love. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and Marcus, sterling Dr. Father Healer, finally felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. They went to the cemetery on the anniversary of Sarah's death, just as they had every year for the past 4 years. But this time was different. This time Victoria asked if it would be okay if she came with them, her voice tentative and respectful, understanding that this was sacred ground where she might not belong. Marcus had said yes without hesitation, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because Tyler had asked if Victoria was family now, and the question had made Marcus realize that the definition of family had grown more complicated and more beautiful than he had ever expected. Riverside Cemetery was peaceful in the early morning mist hanging low over the grass, like prayers made visible. The three of them walked in silence along the winding path, Tyler carrying white lilies that had been Sarah's favorite flower. Victoria holding a small potted plant that would bloom perennially if the groundskeepers allowed it to stay. Sarah's grave was located near the eastern fence, where morning light came first and lasted longest. The headstone was simple grey granite that Marcus had chosen because it reminded him of Sarah's straightforward honesty, her refusal to complicate things that could be said simply. Sarah Marie Sterling, the inscription read, Beloved wife and mother. 1985 to 2018, love multiplies when divided. Tyler knelt and placed the lilies at the base of the stone, his movement reverent and practiced. Hi, Mom, he said in the clear, unself-conscious voice of a child who believed completely that the dead could hear the living. Dad's a doctor again. He helps lots of kids every day. I think you would be really proud of him. Marcus stepped forward and placed his hand on the warm granite, feeling the sun that had been heating the stone since dawn. Hi, Sarah, he said quietly. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. I mean to get to where I could tell you that we are okay. That Tyler's growing up strong and smart and kind, just like you always said he would. His voice caught slightly. I wanted you to know that I'm not stuck anymore. I'm not just surviving. I'm living again, and I'm helping people again, and Tyler gets to see his dad being who he was meant to be, instead of just getting by. Victoria stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of her place in this intimate family ritual. Mrs. Sterling, she began, her voice soft with respect and regret. My name is Victoria. I never got to meet you, but I'm the reason your husband lost everything for so many years. Tyler looked up at her with curious eyes, but didn't interrupt. I can't change what my family did to Marcus. Victoria continued kneeling beside the headstone and placing her small plant in the earth. I can't give back those years of struggle or make it so you didn't have to worry about money during your illness or fix any of the pain we caused. She paused, gathering herself. But I promise you that Marcus and Tyler will never be alone again. I promise that Tyler will grow up knowing his father is a hero, not because of what he lost, but because of how he chose to rebuild. And I promise that I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure Marcus can save as many children as possible, because that's what he was born to do. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Thank you for raising a man who could forgive even when he had every right to stay angry. Thank you for teaching Tyler what love looks like when it's tested. The three of them stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. A bird landed on Sarah's headstone, a cardinal bright red against the grey granite, and Tyler smiled. Mom always said cardinals were good luck, he whispered. Are you going to stay with us? Tyler asked Victoria suddenly, his child's directness cutting through adult complications. Like permanently. Marcus looked at Victoria, seeing her surprise at the question. Her careful consideration of how to answer honestly without promising more than she could deliver. I'd like to, Victoria said carefully. If your dad thinks that's okay. Tyler turned to Marcus expectantly, and Marcus realized that this 8-year-old boy was asking him to make a decision that would reshape their family forever. Not just about Victoria's presence, but about whether he was ready to stop protecting himself from the possibility of loss and start building something that could last. He thought about Sarah, about the love she had given him that had made him believe in the possibility of healing even when everything else was broken. She would want Tyler to have a larger family, would want Marcus to have partnership and support, would want both of them to be open to love in whatever form it arrived. She would want that Marcus said quietly, looking at Sarah's name carved in stone. Sarah always believed that love multiplied when you shared it instead of hoarding it. Tyler grinned and grabbed both their hands, linking them together in a chain of connection that felt like the beginning of something larger than any of them had imagined when they had started this complicated journey toward forgiveness. Cool Tyler said, with the satisfied tone of a child who had successfully engineered an outcome he had been hoping for. "Can we go get breakfast now? All this family stuff is making me hungry." The three of them walked back toward the cemetery gates, Tyler chattering about pancakes and school projects, and whether Victoria had ever seen the clinic's new X-ray machine that could show bones in really cool detail. At the gate, Marcus looked back one more time at Sarah's grave, now bright with morning sunlight and marked with fresh flowers. The cardinal was still there watching them leave with bright, intelligent eyes. Victoria noticed his backward glance. "She approves," she said quietly. "How do you know?" Marcus asked. "Because you are breathing easier. Because Tyler's practically glowing with happiness. Because everything about this feels right instead of forced." She paused. "And because I finally understand what that inscription means, love multiplies when divided." They drove back toward town as morning unfolded around them in shades of possibility. The clinic would open in 2 hours, and there were patients to see, surgeries to perform, lives to save. Tyler was already making plans for after school, chattering about homework and art projects, and the new book he was reading about space exploration. In the rearview mirror, Marcus could see the cemetery growing smaller behind them, but Sarah's presence felt closer rather than more distant. She lived now, not just in his memories, but in the family they were building, in the work he was doing, in the love that had somehow multiplied rather than diminished, despite everything they had lost and found again. Above them, the morning sky spread wide and blue and infinite, like wings finally learning to carry the weight of hope without breaking, ready to soar as high as dreams dared to reach. Sometimes the most beautiful families aren't the ones we are born into. They are the ones we choose, one act of courage, one moment of forgiveness, one decision to trust in love's ability to transform pain into purpose, one beating heart at a time. 6 months later, the Carson Blackwood Children's Clinic had become more than a medical facility. It had become a beacon of hope. Marcus stood in the main corridor watching Victoria help Tyler with his science project about how hearts work. She was explaining circulation with the patience of someone who had learned that the most important lessons couldn't be rushed, while Tyler asked questions that showed he had inherited his father's curiosity about how broken things could be made whole. The clinic had performed over 200 successful surgeries in its first year, each one a testament to the truth that healing wasn't just about medical expertise. It was about believing that every child deserved the chance to grow up healthy, regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen at the medical board. 3 more doctors want to join your clinic. The word is spreading about what you are building there." He smiled, thinking about the wings painted on the building's exterior, how they had weathered the autumn rains and winter snows, and still caught the light each morning like promises being kept. Tyler looked up from his heart model, his face bright with discovery. "Dad, did you know that a heart beats 100,000 times every single day? That's like a lot of chances to keep going." "Yeah, buddy," Marcus said, pulling his son close. "That's exactly right." Victoria joined them, her hair escaping from its ponytail, her hands stained with the markers Tyler had been using to color his diagram. She looked content in a way that had nothing to do with corporate success and everything to do with the quiet satisfaction of useful work. "What are you two plotting?" she asked. "Not plotting," Tyler said seriously. "Learning. Dad says the heart is the strongest muscle in the body because it never gets to rest, but it also never gives up. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you that second chances aren't just possible, they are powerful, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Soul Lift Stories family, because every time someone finds the courage to forgive, Every time someone chooses healing over hurt, every time someone believes that broken wings can learn to fly again. That's not just survival. That's grace. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that sometimes when we think our story is over, we are actually at the beginning of the most beautiful chapter we never saw coming. Because grace isn't about deserving second chances. It's about giving them, receiving them, and believing that love really does multiply when we choose to divide it instead of hoarding it for ourselves. The clinic's wing mural caught the golden hour light as the three of them walked inside together. No longer strangers brought together by tragedy, but a family forged by forgiveness, one healed heart at a time. Because sometimes the most extraordinary healing happens not in the hands of a surgeon, but in the decision to let love transform our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths.